Hey folks, let's chat briefly about transiting Pluto squaring up with natal Pluto. So that's Pluto squaring up with its natal position in the chart. Now, the thing about Pluto in the chart is that it can certainly represent a very highly emotionally charged place within our psychic wiring, within our psyche. It's a lot of heightened emotional psychic energy associated with where Pluto is and how Pluto is aspected in the chart. So Pluto is an emotionally intense place because of the attachment that we have in relation to where Pluto is, the emotional attachments, the emotional energy that needs to be resolved in relation to where it is and how it is aspected. Yeah, so it represents where the soul is carrying certain dynamics from a lifetime to lifetime. I would use the term soul attachment, but it sounds like we're kind of getting into a different territory. But the point is that where Pluto is, there is just this psychic charge, and it is often indicative of where the soul is carrying certain imprints from lifetime to lifetime that need to be resolved urgently, in the sense that there is often a lot of concentrated psychic charge around that place in the psyche, and symbolized, by where it is in the chart. So we're carrying this energy along, and what really happens, or what happens quite often, is that we need to develop a new relationship with what that Pluto is representing in the terms of empowerment. So often, let's say, transmutation of that Plutonian complex has to do with now coming into a relationship of empowerment with the dynamic that has been dogging us. We now have to change our relationship to that dynamic by developing now a more empowered way of being in relation to it. So it's definitely this question of empowerment, soul empowerment, where we are no longer allowing that highly charged dynamic to rob us of our soul power, to rob us of our personal power. So that very sensitive place, when Pluto is squaring up with its natal position, it is being activated, and there is this sort of impetus for change, this impetus to now face up with and to deal with in a very heightened way and very, very challenging way, as symbolized by the square. It's now time to face up to that Plutonian basin of soul memory that the soul is carrying. So what happens is that we now meet in our external lives the dynamics that are very individual to us, in terms of where we are confronting a loss of our soul power, and where we need to now step up to transmute the energy of Pluto in the chart by coming into a relationship of empowerment with what has previously disempowered us. So that is what the Pluto square represents. And based on how Pluto is aspected in the chart, this can look very, very different to each individual. Yeah, each person will have a very particular way in which this Pluto square is played out in their lives. But the point is that at that point with the square, usually external dynamics are met that trigger and activate the soul issues associated with Pluto, and we're meeting it in a very heightened external fashion. So we're actually now recreating the dynamics that have, let's say, dogged our souls from lifetime to lifetime. We're now recreating those dynamics now to meet them again, to see if we can now come into a relationship of empowerment with those issues that we've been facing from lifetime to lifetime. So it's sensitive, it's triggering a very raw place, and can be a very wounded place where we have not yet healed, but we need to face healing in that area so that we can come into much more personal wholeness. That's the kind of summary of the Pluto square Pluto transit there. So this like I said, this transit is going to depend on what the natal chart looks like. And as I'm speaking to you here, I'm thinking about two examples. So the first is someone I've dealt with before in client practice who has Pluto conjunct the North Node in the second house. So obviously that Pluto there in aspect to the nodal axis, we can infer that it's quite significant in the sense that this person is now facing empowerment dynamics that have to do with their relationship to resources and having and financial security, kind of base chakra issues. What do I have? What do I possess? How do I feel empowered or disempowered in relation to those second house issues? So in aspect to the North Node, and obviously opposite the South Node, we know that the person probably is likely to be facing a lot of Plutonian crises concerning the need for them to now go in a direction of empowerment as it relates to these second house issues. And that's exactly what happened with this person, that at the time that Pluto was squaring up with its natal position and activating the nodes, the person experienced complete financial wipeout, complete attrition of their financial resources. And the task for them, it seemed, was really about coming into a new relationship with what they have, their security as represented by their possessions and or lack of possessions. And this was something that this person had been confronting their entire life. You know, what do I have? Do I feel secure? Am I taken care of financially? So, you know, Pluto can really come in at the Pluto square, and it can be a complete wipeout, and it can definitely feel like a very raw time, emotionally raw time, where we are confronted with the need to face up to this issue that's been dogging us from lifetime to lifetime, the need to now face up to it and to now change our relationship with this thing that's been affecting us and has been imprinting our soul for quite some time. So this person had to now face lessons around, well, how do I value myself, self-worth? Is my value attached to what I have? So the symbolic logic then, let's say, of a complete financial wipeout, that's what Pluto can do, in the sense of symbolizing where the soul is now saying, look, it's time for you to now face these dynamics. And I'm going to now initiate a process as symbolized by the astrology and working with the energies of the time. Astrologically speaking, the soul is now, let's say, utilizing those energies to teach the personality something, so that the personality can now integrate those lessons back into the soul matrix. So that's what happened. So the Pluto square is indicative of where the soul, operating on that soul logic level, is initiating now a series of events within the person's external life, forcing them now to face up to these dynamics that need to be brought into resolution. So it's not that there is this kind of Pluto out there in the sky, or we are at the mercy of Pluto, but we have to understand that there is a marriage between what the soul is coming into experience and to resolve, and how the soul is now working in tandem with the astrological configurations of the time. So things are well timed. So, you know, that person now had to go through a process of, well, how am I responding to this total wipeout of my material resources? Am I going to be completely disempowered by this? So, you know, again, it depends on how Pluto is aspected in the chart. I can think of one more example of someone who had the moon opposing Pluto in the chart. So Aries moon opposing Pluto in Libra. Now, Pluto in Capricorn is squaring up with natal Pluto, but also squaring up with the natal moon. So this person experienced, of course, with Pluto, a complete a change of her emotional landscape, that's Pluto to the moon, but also activating along that moon-Pluto axis the dynamics that were entrenched in childhood, particularly around that person's mother, and how that person's mother would have provided this template in terms of power, and how the person's mother was responding to dynamics in the home that had to do with abuse, and whether that person's mother was standing up for themselves in the context of an abusive scenario. So that moon-Pluto imprint was triggered by that Pluto square. So Pluto squaring its natal position in house 7 and squaring the moon. So what happened is that with this person I'm thinking of is that that moon-Pluto childhood dynamic of watching the mother be disempowered was kind of translated into a framework for how that person responded in her own relationship. So moon in house 1, Pluto in house 7, this opposition now also relating to relationships along the 1st house, 7th house axis. So Pluto in squaring up with its natal position was also squaring up with the moon and activating those childhood imprints passed down from the mother, that's the moon, and also now how that would have been figuring into her relationship. So she said that, you know, this Pluto square corresponded with a complete wipeout of the friendships that she would have had, the relationship that she would have had, and now coming into a space of more integrity. But Pluto has this effect of wiping out. So Pluto kind of wiped out or represented the process, the symbolic process in which she experienced this wiping out of her relationships to correct dynamics of being in imbalanced relationships where she did not stand in her own power, and how that would have triggered what was reflected to her by her own mother when she was growing up. So the point is that Pluto, when it squares up with its natal position and activates those aspects, it can be a very emotionally raw time when we are confronted with very intense emotions, and we can feel very, very wiped out. And, you know, it really is a kind of dark night of the soul kind of feeling. And it really demands that we, let's say, go into the heart of our inner resources to really dig down deep into what our true resources are, emotional resources are, what we have internally that cannot be taken away from us. And it made me think, of course, naturally, the death card in the tarot is linked to the Plutonian archetype. But when we see this skeletal figure here on the death card, it kind of symbolizes how we have to now go back to that skeletal core, go back to what is lasting and has longevity within us, going back into our own personal strength. So all the external things are wiped out, leaving us with just this sense of what are my own inner resources. And that is often how we have to approach Pluto transits, but also particularly Pluto squaring up with its own natal position. It's time to confront and develop a relationship with what our own inner resources are, and deriving strength from that, deriving true emotional and soul power from what our own inner resources are. So when the finances are wiped out, when the relationships are wiped out, what happens is this very sort of Plutonian retreat into what the self has, the resources, finding real soul security that has nothing to do with what is happening externally. That is a very, very challenging process. As human beings, we like comfort. We're not okay with things being wiped out. It's difficult for us to exist in the midst of a wipeout, especially of our relationships and our resources. So, the point is that responding to a Plutonian transit, Pluto squaring its natal position, activating all of those complexes associated with Pluto in the chart, in the psyche, demands a response of strength and empowerment. That's the only way to go through it, that we have to now cultivate a way of meeting ourselves, having the internal soul strength to say, you know what, I'm going to now transmute, transcend, or reach beyond this dynamic that has been dogging me for lifetimes. It's time to now face this very highly emotionally charged place within myself. I have to now look myself in the face. And the reason why it's so charged is because it's not only involving this lifetime, this timeline, but where the soul is operating on different lines of time, different realities of time. So that is now being activated along many timelines. So it has lots of time to really be, to kind of develop this strong emotional charge. So that is the tone of it. So you want to check your birth chart to see, you know, what aspects are Pluto involved in, and have a sense of how this Plutonian energy is playing out for you, where these very highly charged emotions are, and you know what could be activated at the time of that first Pluto square. A few thoughts here just on the Pluto square and giving you a few things to think about. Thanks for watching, guys, and until next time, talk soon. Bye.